Environmental Regulations and Racism by Jay Patel, Jack Kyle, Jack Gallagher, Jake Jacobs, and Marco Skian. Next slide, please. The regulations put on our environment have been shown to discriminate against minorities and the poor people of our nation. As Robert D. Bullard, often described as the father of environmental justice, puts it, several families see their health compromised and their homesteads poisoned and devalued by industrial pollution. There is a clear radical divide in the way the government responds to these emergencies. African American families see their health compromised and their homestead, land acquired during the height of Jim Crow segregation, poisoned and devalued by industrial pollution, while the government does absolutely nothing. These African American families were allowed to drink poisoned water from their wells long after the government tests detected industrial contamination. The million-dollar question is, why? Mr. Bullard poses an excellent question. Why is there such a disparity between the environmental treatment of minorities and what evidence highlights this disparity? Next slide, please. As shown in this graph, the state of Minnesota is 32% over the risk guidelines for air pollution. Majority of this is composed of lower income communities and communities of color. According to Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, MPCA, all of Minnesota's air quality is 32% above the risk guidelines. Within low income communities, the number is 46%, and within communities of color, it's 91%. This shows that there is most likely a large power plant, smokestacks, or an air toxin releasing places near, next to, or inside of these communities containing blacks, Hispanics, and other non-white ethnicities. Not only does this result in many health problems, but it is also terrible for the environment, future generations, and other economic values of these communities. Next slide, please. The problem is pollution due to environmental regulations and environmental racism directly affects communities of color and low-income communities. Because of the polluted air and water in these communities, people living there are afraid to use their resources. For example, the lead-infused water in Flint, Michigan, or lower Rio Grande Valley, a town in China that poisoned 80% of their children due to the computer landfill. Both of these tragic events affected the communities composed of non-white ethnicities in very hazardous ways. Not only was their health negatively affected, but also the economic standpoint of these towns and cities decreased significantly, making recovery slower and affecting future generations. According to the World Economic Forum, Flint, Michigan is a prime example of environmental racism. 100,000 black inhabitants were exposed to dangerous levels of lead from aged pipes. This affected 12,000 kids and was not solved for 18 months, even though the residents filed complaints, leading to lots and lots of downfalls. Next slide, please.
One of the main issues or subsets of our problem is the location or ability of factories to disproportionately dispose of their waste products with seemingly no repercussions. In a study from the University of Michigan that went from 1966 to 1995, found that waste has constantly been disposed of in places where the poor and people of color live. This solution consists of two parts. Part one is moving the factories to a neutral location where no one ethnic or racial group is affected more than another. And this allows for waste to be disposed of in a safe and orderly manner rather than in communities. Part two of this solution is converting the production methods into energy efficient that disposes of less waste. The overall solution leads to less waste, and the solution allows for all groups to be affected evenly. Next slide. Pros and cons of our solution. So, solution one, the fair share of pros. It provides less negative environmental effects, and that even though it'll take a long time, the overall benefits are worth it. Neutral locations means no group is affected more than the other. Everyone is treated equally. The withdrawal of factories greatly reduces the likelihood of communities, and no more waste will be produced. For the cons, a lot of time and resources must be spent converting the factories to this new energy efficient location. New locations for power plants can be too far away, and it might take a long time for the energy or the products to reach the location where they need to go. It could cost many people their jobs, since a lot cheap, so going back to point one, it'll take a lot of time and resources needed to convert these factories. So overall, citizens will not be affected by the waste, and companies will produce less waste, which is a benefit for both. It brings health and benefits along with it, but we need to think if this is worth it when we see the list of cons on the slide. Next slide.
Next slide. We believe that as another solution, green energy is a very viable energy source. We believe this as green energy gives off little to no pollution, and that pollution only occurs during its manufacturing and transportation. Green energy is a renewable resource. It is a renewable resource, which means it can last forever, which is different than coal and other materials, which are not renewable and will become exhausted over time. Next. Some of the pros of green energy include that it causes minimal pollution and that its sources can be renewed. The widespread use of green energy could result in better health due to less overall pollution, and also the use of green energy reduces our country's dependence on foreign fuels. The implementation of green energy would have many positive effects, but they do not come without challenges. Next slide, please. Some of the other cons of green energy include that it is extremely expensive and therefore can have awful effects on the poor. Another problem with it is that it is unreliable and does not always produce enough power. Green energy also takes up large amounts of space, which may pose a problem in the fact that it could threaten the economy through the redirection of some of its most valuable materials. Next slide, please. In sum, while green energy may be cleaner than coal, it comes at a hefty price. Expenses that have terrible effects on the poor, unreliability and not enough energy being produced, and the use of large amounts of space for its generators. This transition would also include many positive things, including less dependence on foreign fuel, better overall health, the sources will not become exhausted, and less pollution.
Finding the best solution. Solution 1. Can you go back to that one?
Sure.
Solution 1 has less environmental effects and reduces the communities affected by it. This solves both the issue of environmental racism and pollution on the environment to an extent. However, it does have some limitations. For one, it is expensive and may be difficult to spread worldwide. It is sustainable though, which means that it would be fit to replace current power plants and facilities. The problem of workers being displaced and the issue of finding new workers may be solved with time through another solution. Ultimately, this solution is a realistic one that may take place over a longer period of time. Solution 2 has minimal pollution and is renewable. This solves the issue entirely in areas in which it is implemented. However, it is even more expensive and difficult to spread. And the expensiveness of this solution makes it difficult to spread it specifically in low-income communities, the areas where this solution is needed most. It is also unsustainable for our current energy needs, which makes it unfit to replace our current system. It is inefficient and expensive in terms of space too, which raises another issue. This solution can be improved with time through better technology, but right now it is unfit to replace our current system entirely to an extent where it would make a difference. Next slide. For this reason, we chose solution 1, energy efficient factories and power plants to be the best solution. In conclusion, communities of color and low-income communities experience an environmental injustice in which they are more likely to be situated in an area with more sources of pollution and be exposed to higher levels of pollution. The pollution in itself is an issue in terms of the environment. We explored 2 solutions: energy efficient factories and power plants, and green energy. Energy efficient power plants sustainable solution that was fit to replace our current system, even with its limitations, which could be solved with time, while green energy would have to be improved upon to replace our current system. Next slide. That's the end.
Thanks, guys. Okay, you ran way over. I didn't cut you off because we had plenty of time, and you guys were the last